climate change is no longer an abstraction to many companies. They're beginning to see the effects very directly in their P&Ls. And employees, customers, and now even investors are starting to demand action. So here to talk about how companies are responding, Pierre-André de Chalandet from Saint-Gobain and Christiane Figueres. And Yves Perrier from Mundi is making his way through the Paris traffic and will join us as soon as he gets here. But please come to the stage. Thank you. Christiane, let me start with you, because you've been working on these issues for many years at the UN.
You can almost put decades into that sentence.
I didn't want to say that.
But you can.
I don't. For many decades. In your view, has business gotten the message?
I think that verb needs to be conjugated in the gerund. Business is getting the message. And it's very interesting because I've been with this process long enough, over 30 years, that I have seen that this has very typically a mutually reinforcing cycle that occurs. So the last cycle that was completed was the cycle in which, before we adopted the Paris Agreement in 2015, the 2 years before, there was incredible corporate leadership, there was financial leadership, there was insurance companies leadership, and all of that allowed the governments, when they finally came to Paris, to have a look around and perceive a surround sound effect, which was, wow, everybody is on here. Everybody is on message. And that allowed them to actually take not just the necessary decisions that they had to take, but actually to be much more ambitious than the corporates and the investors thought that they were going to be. And that's the Paris Agreement. So we went from a debacle to the corporates taking the lead, almost looking back at the governments to see what the governments were doing, then the governments picking up and taking a very ambitious decision in the Paris Agreement that honestly was very unexpected. And now we're in the next cycle. Now we're in the next cycle with the help of many of you, where corporate leadership is actually increasing. Certainly financial flows are moving, are shifting quite correctly from high carbon to low carbon. And we're beginning to see that governments that have been rather sluggish, frankly, in the past 2 years are beginning to look there and going, wow, maybe I need to catch up. And my sense is that governments will, perhaps by next year, not this year at all, but perhaps by next year or the year after that, will then not only catch up with this leadership, but actually surpass. And so this will go. Because
is that process moving fast enough?
No. No, we have to put that process on steroids because it's been moving to the pace that policy can move.
Slow.
Very
glacial.
Slow. Glacial. Combined with the speed, of course, that corporate decisions that are much quicker and certainly investment shifts that are quicker. But it has to move much quicker because 2020 to 2030 is the critical decade. If we are not able to halve our emissions from where we are now, to go to whatever your emissions are, and I'm hoping all of you know exactly what your emissions are, corporate-wise and personally, if we're not able to halve, each of us has to get to half of those emissions by 2030, starting from wherever you are. And globally, we have to be able to do that. Because if we're not able to do that, then we cannot get to net zero by 2050, which is what science dictates.
Everything has to be halved by 2030.
Everything and everyone.
Pierre-André, is Saint-Gobain going to make it?
Well, first of all, the business model of Saint-Gobain is largely driven by this topic because we provide energy efficiency into buildings.
Yep.
So we are a big part of the solution. We are a key actor of the energy transition.
Yeah.
But to produce those, glass, insulation materials that are needed to reduce energy consumption in building, which is 40% of the CO2 emission altogether at a world level. So it's a major
40%.
topic. In order to produce these materials, we are ourselves emitting CO2.
Yeah.
So we also need to improve our footprint.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, I am in the middle of the road, I would say. We have taken, and I think with what Christina was saying, it's exactly there. Just before the COP21, we took for Saint-Gobain a commitment to reduce our emissions by 20% between 2010 and 2025. And until 2 years ago, I was not sure we would get that. So it's not half, but 2025, but it's 20%. We are on the path. Because
but it's 2025. You got 5 more years to get the other 25%.
Good math. I was going to say the same.
And then in September at the UN, I took like a number of other companies. This September,
yes.
2 months ago, I included Saint-Gobain in this very ambitious target for 2050 of zero net emission. And frankly, technically, I think I know how to get there. We need, but 2025 for an industrial company is tomorrow. So we need to take action for next.
But that probably gets you to where Christiana wants you to.
But yes, the problem is that I technically know how to do that, but I will not be able to do that if there is not a framework,
government
framework. And the most important thing for us is a price signal.
Yeah.
And that is going to take time. But if there is not a price signal, and if most of the electricity is not decarbonated, we will not do that.
Well, and now let me just ask you quickly about the other piece of it, which is the big picture, the buildings.
Yeah.
I assume, Christiana, you mean that buildings have to cut their emissions in half by 2030. Can that happen?
That technically, this is something we know how to do. We can do much more than that. In a number of countries, the way new buildings are built meets that. You have reduced much more than that. So the big issue is the renovation, which is a big part, the retrofit, which is a huge part of the issue, is going to happen fast enough. And I would say today,
but the renovations can be done to standard.
Exactly. Yeah. And this renovation is not happening in most countries fast enough. No.
And again, that's policy.
That requires government policies, whether it is incentives, whether it is regulation, and it's a mix.
All right.
Of that.
Let's get the financial side into this conversation. Yves Perrier is here. Please join us on the stage.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for being here. We've been talking about, Christiana has given us a goal. We have to all have our emissions by 2030. I have to say, I felt in these climate change discussions over the last decade that the investors were sort of the last people to get on board, but you are fully on board, right? My understanding is Mundi is committed to 100% ESG within, what's the time frame?
Firstly, I would say that for Mundi, this question of to be a responsible investor is not new. When we created the company in 2010, we defined 4 pillars for the DNA of the company. 3 were traditional performance of funds, quality of the relationship with clients. And the last was to be a responsible investor. And we have done this at a time where, in fact, there were limited people speaking about this. Firstly, because it was a conviction that in a world that has liberalized, the counterpart of liberalization is responsibility, and especially the responsibility of investors. The second conviction is the fact that when you are looking with a long-term perspective, there is no contradiction between financial performance and the fact to take into account the interest of the society as a whole. We have done this, and today we manage 20% of the global amount of AUM of Amundi. I mean an amount, the global amount is 1.6 billion euros, integrating ESG criteria. And last year we have announced an ambitious plan for the next 2 years, which is on 2 axes. The first axe is linked to what we consider our mission is to to give a signal to all the corporates in which we invest, a signal of the necessity to develop, to implement plans to integrate the interest of society as a whole. I mean, the question of environment, but also the social question and the question of governance. And we have announced that in 2021, 100% of our funds will integrate an ESG assessment in addition to the traditional financial analysis. And we do this with a best-in-class approach. We give a rating to the companies from A to G. G, we exclude the company. A is a good rating. F is a bad rating. And then we overweight or underweight in our portfolio the companies with this rating. And by this way, we align the interest of the companies in order to maximize the shareholder value with the interest of the society. The second axe is to raise money to finance the energy transition. And I give you some examples. We have launched successively 3 main funds with the IFC, the subsidiary of the World Bank, then with the European Bank of Investment, and more recently with the AIB, which is the Chinese bank which is financing infrastructure, which are funds for emerging bonds dedicated to the financing of the energy transition. Second example, we have created a joint venture with EDF, the French energy public utility, in order to finance renewables energy. And so to summarize, I would say that our action is firstly to create an incentive on corporates, on also states, in order that they integrate this ESG criteria, and secondly, to do a job to raise money in order to finance energy transition.
Yves, what's total funds under management that Amundi has right now?
The total amount of funds are 1.6 trillion euros.
1.6 trillion.
Of which 700 billion euros are funds dedicated to retail customers, and the other part, it's a mandate that we have for institutional investors.
And what percentage of that portfolio currently does not meet this standard that you're going to set for 2 years from now?
Today we are at 20% is ESG, is growing, I would say, month after month. And for the retail funds, at the end of 2021, all the funds.
But that means either you're going to have to do some massive turnover in your portfolio, or these companies are going to have to make some very big changes.
Well, it's difficult to define precisely. I'm not sure that there will be so many changes. And for a very simple reason is what I mentioned in my introduction, the fact that there is no position between financial performance and ESG criteria. We have delivered a study for the last 4 years, and which is a comparison between a portfolio with a company with a good rating and a company with, let's say, a bad rating. In fact, they the first bulk overperformed about 200 basis points the second portfolio.
Yeah, Christiana is $1.6 trillion going from 20% compliant to 100% compliant in 2 years. Is that enough? Is that the kind of change you're looking for?
I must say, I am personally aware of Amundi's leadership way before the Paris Agreement, and quite impressive many of the pioneering steps that Amundi took. And Amundi is no longer alone. Today, globally, we already have $8.8 trillion of assets under management across, obviously, many players that have either already completely decarbonized or are in the process of, but have certainly taken on the commitment of being at net zero by 2050. And just last September, because we're looking at the latest things, we had a very impressive announcement from institutional investors under a new alliance called the Asset Owner Alliance, $2.4 trillion, that are actually committed to truly putting pressure on the companies that they partially own in order to get them to the 2030 deadline that I've talked about and the 2050. And we're hoping Amundi is going to join the Asset Owner Alliance because it would, again, it would show Amundi's leadership.
Is it real? In other words, will it make a difference?
Yes, yes, I definitely, well, actually, let me say, it is already making a difference.
It's already making a difference.
It's already making a difference because companies are already feeling the pressure, A, from their shareholders, but also they're sort of being sandwiched, right? They're feeling the pressure from their shareholders to be much more responsible with their assets. They're also feeling a lot of pressure from their employees. Employee activism has shot up, and also from their future clients, millennials.
So you feel like the pace of change is accelerating?
Yes.
It's just, the question is it accelerating fast enough to meet the hugely ambitious goal that you've put out there?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, and there is acceleration, but for me, the acceleration is still linear. We have to get to exponential acceleration.
You ready for exponential acceleration?
We are ready, but that I said, I think, you know,
Policy.
We need policies. Most companies today have been turning, and for us it has been the case for a long time, as being part of the problem to be part of the solution. And for a huge number of companies, as Yves was saying, there are plenty of opportunities for business in this area. So I think it's not only that we are going to be pushed by our investors or by our employees, and I fully agree with you. Today, they are the two most important forces. I would say governments are behind, but the society and the financial community are two very important forces. So, but we will need policies.
What are you hearing from your investors? Is what we're hearing from Yves a common story?
I would say 10 years ago, when I was doing the road shows, I was very listening very few of that. 5 years ago, I was starting to listen, but generally it was a part of the company of the investor. So there was a governance, I would say, or the ESG compartment of Amundi.
Yeah.
Well, I have a discussion, and then I was seeing another part of Amundi who was pushing me on my quarterly results. And what I see in the last 2-3 years is that now they are coming together.
Critical.
So not all investors, but I see that growing, and I think it's good, and I think finance should play a major role in that area.
Yeah, Cristiano, let's talk about the policy part of it. I mean, Pierre-André has been very clear about the need for a price on carbon, the need for building standards. Can that happen on a local basis, or does it have to happen on a global basis?
Well, we do have a price on carbon on a local basis. Regretfully, I would say. Regretfully in the sense that we have 60 jurisdictions around the world that have a price on carbon. 40 of them have it because they're in some kind of a trade relationship, a cap and trade, and 20 because through a carbon tax. That's a good thing. What is regrettable about it is that there is no universal price on carbon. And honestly, that has been under negotiation for, way before I had gray hair. And it's probably going to, I don't think that's going to be solved this year in Madrid at the COP. If it is, I shall be very pleasantly surprised because it does accelerate incredibly. I think we're going to need to have one more round of conversation by that. In the meantime, that cannot stop us. Honestly, there still is a lot that governments can do in terms of incentives, in terms of regulations, many of which they already know. They know what incentivizes energy efficiency. Yeah. They know what incentivizes renewable energy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a price on carbon. Price on carbon is the easiest, most effective if you ask economists, if you believe economists, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be, the perfect does not need to stop the good.
Were you going to say?
I was going to say it depends on the sector. You have to have a segmented approach depending on the sector. When you're talking about building, most of that is very local.
Very local.
So you can have a local strategy for one government, and regulation is a big part of it. When you are going to talk about large emissions from industrial companies, if you have too much a difference between different parts of the world, you are going to see a massive risk of delocalization. And that's today the issue that Europe is confronted with. Europe is ahead globally, I would say, on these topics. But, you know, if the fact that Europe is ahead and there is too much a difference between what Europe does and the other, we are going to kill the European industry. So I think there is a need for everybody to advance at the same pace, or to provide mechanisms which keep competitivity in place.
So I know everyone in this room is dealing with the same issue. I'm going to open it up to questions in just a minute. I'd really like to get some of you involved. But before I do that, Yves, let me ask you, all of you have referred to the pressure from employees, you've referred to the pressure from customers, but that pressure is not always entirely rational. One of the things we're hearing a lot about now is disinvestment. Let's disinvest from all fossil fuels. How do you deal with that?
I would say that we are in a present context which is the following, and as Pierre-André said, 10 years ago nobody was speaking of this. Now everybody is speaking of this. But to be honest, there is a lot of confusion in this question. And that's the reason why I don't believe that it's really possible at the present time to standardize and so on, because we need firstly to build the principle and to define the role of all the players. Corporates have their job to do. Investors have their job to do. But there is a major job which is to be done, is the job of governments and politicians. And in the present situation, I think that we lack of, major governmental initiatives. We can raise money to finance the energy transition, but we can't define which is the good offer of energy in Europe. We have, for example, the debate about the question of nuclear. Is nuclear green or not? My conviction is nuclear is green. Second point is the question of the warming of atmosphere is a global question. And we know that to be in line with the 2 or 3 degrees of the Paris Agreement, the main field of battle will be emerging countries. I will take an example. In India today, 3/4 of the energy is carbon. And this is a problem, the recent problem in New Delhi. They have to double their consumption of energy to satisfy the needs of their population. And they will need massive investment, and including nuclear, in order to meet with this. What is the most important is to invest in Europe to have a small decrease, or to invest, more in these countries. And so, I will take a comparison, which is the following. In 1973, in France, the French government decided the building of 55 or 53 nuclear plants in order to meet the question of independence in energy after the crisis of 1973. Do you think that today a government or several governments of the European level is able to take this kind of decision? The answer is not, and it's a problem.
Christiane, does nuclear have to be part of the answer?
For some people, definitely nuclear is part of the, it is not the answer, but and I think honestly that we're no longer at the situation in which we can afford the luxury of saying this one is in and this one is out. We have to broaden that portfolio as much as possible.
You know,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, the solution is first to have more energy efficiency, and then the second point is to decarbonate the energy. And from that standpoint, you have plenty of options, but clearly nuclear is one of them.
Negawatts before megawatts.
Exactly. But the first thing is to decorrelate energy and growth.
Oh, a question right back there and then one right up here. And please introduce yourself.
Vivian Wall from Fortune. I noticed there's really no talk at all about President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and increasingly speaking to both politicians and CEOs, the message that comes through is it doesn't matter, that it really doesn't make an impact. I'm especially curious to hear from Christiana Figueres if she agrees with this, or what exactly is the impact of this decision?
I would agree that it currently is not having much of an impact, currently being the operative word in that sentence. Currently, we have 70% of the GDP of the United States that continues to decarbonize, that is across states, cities, and corporates and investors. They continue to decarbonize, A, because they know that's the only way that they're going to be competitive, and B, because they know that there is a democracy in the United States and it won't always be these people in the White House. So they are planning for the long game and not for the short game. The reason why currently is also important is because it has not had terribly much of an international effect as long as it's only 4 years. If this goes into 8 years, then I really question whether that is not going to have more of an international impact.
Interesting. Question right here.
Scott Wharton from Logitech. Can you speak to the morality of companies buying offsets as opposed to just cutting their emissions? Is that a moral thing to do?
Yes,
Buying offsets.
it is a very moral thing to do as long as instead is not in your sentence, as long as it is as well as. So we all have the responsibility of first being as carbon efficient and energy efficient as possible. Secondly, reducing as much as possible, as much as technologies and policies will allow us, but truly doing that. And thirdly, there is no reason why all of us cannot be carbon neutral today, because we can first reduce our inefficiency, we can reduce the emissions through technology changes and policy changes, and thirdly, we absolutely must plant more trees on this planet. Even if we were absolutely perfect about energy, we still have too many emissions out there. And what trees do, and the restoration of degraded lands, is it does something that the real estate industry has always known. Location, location, location. Carbon in the atmosphere is our enemy. Carbon in the soil is our friend. And what trees do is they take carbon in the air and put it back where it belongs, is in the soil. So don't think of it as an offset, think of it as a very important contribution to carbon neutrality.
So you're okay if the people in this room who traveled here by jets make that up by buying carbon offsets?
Well, it's the make up that's the problem.
Oh, you don't like that phrasing?
No, because you can't say,
they should
okay,
come
I'm just
on a bicycle and buy carbon offsets.
There you go.
Axel Kühner of Greiner. So I'm in the plastics industry, so I am the living evil. So I'd address a question to Pierre-André. Speaking about politics, what I have learned, if you're waiting for politics, they come up with quick fixes or things they believe that there are quick fixes, but tendentially they go into the wrong direction. So that's what people perceive as a quick fix, but based on facts, you would do different things. So what can corporates do apart from classic lobbying to influence political decisions?
I'm not sure I agree with you that just the quick fix. I think there are some sound policy which can be put in place. And in terms of energy efficiency in buildings, that was happened. But as you talk of plastic, I want to take another example. The material we produce in Saint-Gobain, glass, plasterboard, are materials that you can recycle permanently. And the more I use these materials which have been used in former building, the less I consume energy to produce new materials. So recycling is for me great. The problem is that in order to get these materials from what should become progressively a materials bank, which is the existing building, to use less raw materials, new raw materials, I can't do it alone.
Yeah.
We need a framework. And this is local by country, we need a framework.
Well, that raises an interesting question we were talking about earlier today. Are cities more important than nations?
Everybody is important.
Everybody's important, and cities already have 60% of global population and will soon be at 75% of global population. They're already at 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So yes, cities are absolutely critical, and luckily there are 10,000 mayors of 10,000 cities around the world who have understood that and know that it is in their interest to give their citizens a more livable city.
That's a big number, but how many are we leaving out? And how big are their cities?
Oh, way more, way more. No, absolutely.
No, they can be powerful actors, I think.
Yeah.
They're powerful actors, and Bloomberg, mayor of New York, likes to say, nobody can ever get to the home of the head of state, the president or the prime minister, but everyone knows where the mayor lives, and everybody comes and knocks on his or her door. And so mayors
So hit the streets.
Yes, hit the streets.
Okay. Other, yeah, I see a hand in the mirror, but I can't tell where it is. Oh, right there, okay.
Hi, Judy Hess, Copperleaf. Actually, at Copperleaf, we help people bring, environmental, social, and financial parameters into the decision-making process of how they spend their money and invest in their businesses. But I just wanted to talk about the fact that a free resource has infinite demand. When we talk about tankering, which is one example, when airlines are making decisions about whether they're going to tanker fuel or not, they don't bring into account the cost of carbon into this decision. So in the case of British Airways recently, they indicated that they were going to save 42 pounds by tankering their gasoline or their fuel for their aircraft, as opposed to fundamentally, fueling at the next stop on short domestic flights, because there is no cost of carbon. And in fact, they were going to be emitting a lot more carbon by carrying that fuel. So how can we get organizations to bring environmental and social and financial impacts into the decision-making process? There might be a lot of low-hanging fruit there if we could drive this behavior in. Is there anything happening to help drive that behavior? And actually, there's a Forbes article right here that talks about the amount of carbon emitted.
Sorry, a what article?
A Forbes article. I'm just throwing it out. It's in June, 7 days ago, which talk all about tankering.
Okay,
so,
let's quick answer.
The quick answer is that I think most companies today are putting in place, and their governance and the boards are getting involved, a number of indicators which are required more and more by investors to set the frame of their actions. And I think, what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
So the first thing is to try to measure it, and then we are pragmatic in corporate. We'll take the action which bear the more fruits.
Pierre-André, Christiana, Yves, I actually am coming away from this conversation encouraged, which is not what I expected.
We have to be optimistic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.